Welcome to the Gamut of Performance podcast. On this episode of the podcast, I get to talk to sports scientist Ernie Rimer. Ernie is the Director of Sports Science for the University of Utah. There's so much misinformation in the field of sports science, and Ernie Rimer helps us set it straight. We talk about strategic periodization, magnitude-based inferences, and the high-performance model. Ernie is a wealth of knowledge, so without further ado, here is Ernie Rimer. Ernie Rimer, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate you being on. For the listeners at home, will you just tell us a little bit about your background and how you got to where you are, and also a little bit of what your motivation is?
First of all, thank you for giving me the opportunity to be a guest on your podcast. It's a true honor, and I'd also like to thank all of the listeners. I hope that this time is useful for you, insightful, and if neither of those, maybe I can just entertain you for a few minutes.
Fair enough.
I really started to pursue sports science when I was working at the U.S. ski team. I was hired into their sports science department as a strength and conditioning coach. And that was when this concept of sports science became a reality to me, when in fact it had always been there before during my undergrad and my master's degree, and reading all the articles, my different internships to try to figure out how to bring research to life in the training setting. It was always there. It just wasn't until I got to that new job that sports science became a real thing, and it really started to intrigue me. A little later, the U.S. ski team reshaped their performance department into what they call the high performance department. And now there's these two concepts, the high performance model and sports science, that really inspired me. And while I was at the U.S. ski team, I started to read a lot of books about elite talent, about what it takes to become a high-level performer. And books like Talent is Overrated, Bounce, Outliers. And in that reading, I also read a book called The Fearless Mind by Craig Manning. And that was a really important book for me because I'm reading all these books that are breaking down the cultures and the climate of elite performers. And I'm asking myself the entire time, how can I do this? How can I be a high performer? And how can I create greater performance among the people around me? And Dr. Manning, in his book, The Fearless Mind, lays out a really simple method. It's truly a personal development method where you focus on the process rather than the outcome. And then I read The Talent Code by Daniel Coyle. And in the Talent Code, he talks about hotbeds, these tiny places that beyond all odds create exponential amounts of talent. So I'm thinking about everything I've read in these books, these pop culture books, and what Dr. Manning has shared. And I start to form a vision for what I want to create in my career. And that's simple. For me, I would like to help establish a hotbed for sports performance management and practice in the United States. And that leads me to a mission that I have, the thing that gets me out of bed every day. And that's to drive Utah athletics, its teams, coaches, staff, and athletes to greater performance and success through the high performance model and evidence-informed practice.
Okay. So you touched a little bit on the high performance model, right? So will you kind of just touch on what that entails and kind of how you've helped to implement that?
Absolutely. For me, the high performance model is really a model of collaboration. Mm-hmm. It's actually been studied for quite a long time. And I didn't know that at first. Mm-hmm. I think many people assume that high performance is something that's just for sport.
Yeah.
But when I was writing the foreword for my dissertation, which I'm still working on, by the way, mm-hmm. I was sitting in bed with my wife, who's a lot more successful than I am. And she's a lot smarter and better looking than me too, by the way. I was telling her about how I needed to do a lit review in order to write the forward chapter of my dissertation. And I told her that I was looking for information on the high performance model. And she corrects me and says, "You mean the high performance organization?" I said, "No, the high performance model." She goes, "Well, the HBO has been in the business world for quite some time." Mm-hmm. And I started to dig, and sure enough, there it is. The HPO, the High Performance Organization, mm-hmm. has been around for quite a long time. Mm-hmm. And the first book published on the topic was in 1984 by authors David Bradford and Alan Cohen at Stanford.
Okay.
And the name of the book is Managing for Excellence, The Guide to Developing High Performance in Contemporary Organizations. And if you read the values that they present, it truly models what the high performance model is today. It talks about how cohesive teams jointly own management. It talks about how those teams encourage input from each other, that they make decisions through consensus as a team. They deal with their problems head on. And most importantly, they always maintain a vision of the future. And this goes back to 1984.
Wow.
I was just a tyke at that time. And so this stuff has been around for quite a long time. The challenge for me is to try to bring this to life in modern day in a large organization. And that's probably where the greatest challenge and fulfillment comes, is trying to figure out how to navigate the waters to bring this type of model to life in present day.
Okay. Cool. That's really interesting. So, talking about sports science, right? So can you define sports science a little bit? Because a lot of people seem to think that anyone that sits behind a computer and uses Excel or is good at statistics is a sports scientist. But what truly is sports science?
For me, sports science is simply a study of sport. And what you study depends on your goal and your objectives. For me, my objective is performance. So I study sport through the lens of helping athletes and teams and the athletics organization perform at a higher level. And if I can approach sports science with that definition, it gives me a lot of freedom to address issues and ask questions across all boundaries. And at the end of the day, my focus is and always will be achieving higher performance. Well, at least until my personal vision and mission changes, that is.
Yeah, fair enough. So with that, will you tell us kind of what the current state of sports science in the U.S. is?
It's a great question, and people will probably think I'm crazy if I admit this, but I've actually been tracking the profession in the U.S. since about 2007.
Okay.
And over these last 11 years, there's been an exponential rise in people with the title sports science somewhere in their, or with the word sports science somewhere in their title in the United States. And about 50% of them are Americans. About 50% of them are from other countries. A large number of them, especially in the earlier years that I started tracking this, have had or were pursuing PhDs when they acquired their position. And unfortunately, there's very few females working as sports scientists compared to the number of males working as sports scientists at the moment.
Okay.
And there's been an exponential growth. It's continued to rise every single year until 2017. Now, my information may not be fully valid because I scrape the internet for this information. I scour everything I can find on the internet, and I also just keep my ears open, keep my ear to the ground to find out who's getting hired, and I look into it. 2017 is the first year since this rise started when there's been a blip, when there wasn't an exponential rise. And either I haven't been able to collect all that information, or maybe the pendulum is swinging away from sports science in the United States. And I hope that the latter is not true, that's for sure.
Yeah. Okay. So what kind of stuff are you currently working on within the field of sports science?
There's two big topics that I'm kind of diving into right now. One of them is strategic periodization. And I've become somewhat obsessed with the controversy between null hypothesis statistical testing and magnitude-based inferences.
Okay.
I might be able to comment on strategic periodization first, if you'd like.
Yeah, let's go with that.
Well, basically, strategic periodization is, I don't think it's really a new concept. I think it's been around for a while. I think some have referred to it in the past as tactical periodization.
Okay.
But I think it has recently been rephrased strategic periodization because in their recent article, Robertson and Joyce stated that perhaps it should be strategic periodization rather than tactical because there's a lot of information on this concept of tactical periodization. And tactical periodization may truly just be about the coaching aspects, the technical and tactical planning of an athlete or a team in order to maximize success on game day. Whereas strategic periodization is really about intentional strategies that allow your team to peak for your matches or events that have greater priority.
Okay.
And at Utah, our football team and our basketball team have become my muse on this topic.
Okay.
Right now, I have a handful of interns doing. Most of those interns come from a math, analytics, or computer science background.
Okay.
The hardest part about strategic periodization is trying to assess and gauge team performance.
Yeah, definitely.
Because until we can truly measure team performance, how is it that we know all of our monitoring strategies actually help us win? How is it that we know that a coach's day-by-day practice plan and progression into a match actually helps us perform at a higher level? How do we know that practicing too much hurts performance on game day, and for that matter, practicing too little might hurt us on game day? It's pretty hard to truly know that without being able to measure team performance.
Yeah, that's the $1 million question, isn't it?
It is. And my math interns and my analytics interns have been working on that for me for about 15 months now.
Okay.
And it's really tricky because you can win a game and play like crap.
Yeah.
You can lose a game and play lights out. You can win and play well. You can lose and play poorly. So winning and losing is full of what you might call type 1 and type 2 error, if we're going to bring some statistical talk to this.
Okay.
Type 1 error might be those false positives when you win but played poorly. And type 2 error might be those false negatives, right?
Yeah.
Where you lost the game and you played well. So what else can we look at? We might be able to look at margin. We might be able to look at trends in box score statistics. There's a number of things we can look at to try to gauge team performance. And I don't feel that I can ever have a truly objective, quantitative approach to strategic periodization and it can measure team performance.
Yeah.
Until then, a lot of the approaches that we use at Utah are qualitative. They're based on our experience and our judgments, our feel for what's going on, rather than what the data and the science is actually telling us.
Yeah, I mean, there's just so many variables within a team, you know? I mean, how your best player is feeling, how your middle guys are feeling. And so it's really difficult if you to try to chop it up to numbers. So
it's extremely difficult. And since we're kind of on that topic, what I might say is, going back to my mission, I said that I want to help drive greater performance through evidence-informed practice.
Yeah.
And evidence-informed practice allows a little bit of wiggle room.
Okay.
Because if we're truly evidence-based, then we're replicating what was done in the lab in some controlled experiment, and that's not what really happens.
Yeah.
Every day we have to make decisions, and I think that the best decision might be a balance between science and evidence, feasibility, and cultural biases and values.
Okay.
So that allows for some freedom to have some art and experience, some non-scientific experience that allows for you to weigh your decisions through questions like, can we actually do this? Do we have the manpower? Can we afford it? Is it time efficient?
Yeah.
Is it sustainable? Do we have the facilities? Those are the feasibility questions that you always have to ask when you're trying to implement science into your practice.
Yeah.
But like I mentioned with the topic of strategic periodization, a lot of what I'm doing and a lot of the advice I might provide sport coaches, strength and conditioning coaches, and everyone else is truly from experience and my effort to assimilate what the research has told us. But we haven't quite gotten to the point to put this stuff to the test yet, because we're still figuring out how to reliably and validly measure team performance.
Okay. So on that, right, you touched a little bit on magnitude transdisciplinary-based inferencing and the null hypothesis. Will you kind of dive into that one a little bit more?
Yeah, this is a really interesting topic.
Mm-hmm.
So everyone who has taken a stats class knows that the p-value is so important. And do you know, I might just drop a quiz on you, and if you were doing a statistical test, what p-value are you seeking?
At least 0.05, correct?
0.05. And if you have a p-value that's less than 0.05, then we say, well, the observed results are statistically significant and there's a real effect here.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't say this, but some authors, Rosnall and Rosenthal, in 1989 said, surely God loves 0.06 nearly as much as 0.05. Right?
Yeah.
So who decided that 0.05 was this magic value? And this idea, this concept, this limitation in using strict p-values or null hypothesis testing is where other methodologies were born. Okay. And I think if you fast forward to 2006, Alan Batterham and Will Hopkins wrote a commentary in the International Journal of Sports Physiology and Performance, introducing the concept of magnitude-based inferences. And the concept wasn't brand new at that time because Will Hopkins had been talking about it for a few years prior. But it's based off this idea that in sports, and especially elite sport, we have small sample sizes. It's very difficult to get a p-value of less than 0.05 with a small sample size. That's the reality.
Mm-hmm.
If I were to give an example of that, I did some data collection on 6 alpine skiers who were all ranked top 10 in the world in their discipline. Mm-hmm. So I had 60% of the world's top 10 racers. Mm-hmm. Well, that's a pretty large sample size, if you ask me.
Yeah.
But it's still only 6 people.
Yeah.
So Will Hopkins and Alan Batterham started to talk about this idea of magnitude-based inferences, this statistical method that allows you to determine the probability that any observed change is beneficial, trivial, or harmful. Magnitude-based inferences has taken sports science like wildfire.
Okay.
And some things have happened that really made magnitude-based inferences look a lot stronger. Over the last 4 or 5 years, there have been several commentaries provided that bring into question the null hypothesis statistical test and have made recommendations to do it in different ways. Okay. All the way to the point that in 2014, I believe, a journal called Basic and Applied Social Psychology banned null hypothesis significance testing from their journal.
Really? Okay.
And this is remarkable because if I'm not mistaken, the null hypothesis test was invented in the social and behavioral sciences. Mm-hmm. And then one journal there banned it.
Yeah, that's very interesting.
So now it looks like magnitude-based inferences is got a leg up. Mm-hmm. Until another professor from Stanford, Kristen Sinani, recently published a paper questioning magnitude-based inferences. And through her simulations, she reported very convincingly that magnitude-based inferences are subject to unacceptable rates of type 1 error, false positives.
Okay.
And from her commentary, Medicine and Science and Sports and Exercise, just on June 27th, a couple weeks ago, announced that they would be banning magnitude-based inferences from their journal. And this is for me, right, a guy who's trying to be a better statistician.
Yeah.
And who has dedicated the last 2 years of his life trying to learn magnitude-based inferences and really understand it.
Yeah.
It's mind-blowing because now a statistical procedure that was invented in the sports sciences has been banned by a sports science journal.
Yeah.
So I've been watching this. I've been intrigued by that. I'm not upset if I have to change to new statistical procedures. I'm not upset that the time I've spent learning this procedure I think is important is not valid anymore because that's how science works.
Yeah.
But I'm just really, really excited to see where we might go next with statistics in the sports sciences and in research in general.
Yeah. No, that's really, really interesting because, you know, the amount of papers that have been published using the null hypothesis is, you know, it's huge. You know, there's most papers that you see on an academic journal or academic database. do have null hypothesis. So that's, hugely impactful.
It's huge. And for that matter, there may very well be thousands of papers by now that have used magnitude-based inferences. And in the same way that the social and behavioral sciences have tried to replicate and failed to replicate several studies, perhaps what this professor from Stanford points out is the need to go back and critically evaluate all of the studies that have been done in the sports sciences using magnitude-based inferences. And she states that one of the problems is that we set our smallest worthwhile change too low. The smallest worthwhile change is truly the effect size that you consider, the effect size threshold that you consider to be a meaningful change. And what has been adopted traditionally is an effect size of 0.2 standard deviations. So if your two averages differ by 0.2 or 20% of the pooled standard deviation between the two samples, and you say this is a small effect and it's real and meaningful. Well, here's the kicker about that. And let's just, for a guy who is drafting a paper now and will attempt to publish a paper using magnitude-based inferences, I'll admit that. Let's just go ahead and critically evaluate that point. The effect size of 0.2 was proposed by Jacob Cohen for the social and behavioral sciences. Moderate effect is 0.5 standard deviations, and a large effect is 0.8. And effect sizes in social and behavioral science is a lot different than effect size in sport, exercise, and performance. It's a lot different. Yet we've just pulled Dr. Cohen's effect sizes over to our world, and most papers who have used magnitude-based inferences in the sports sciences use an effect size of 0.2 as the smallest worthwhile change. And in 1992, in his commentary, Jacob Cohen admitted that his designation of 0.2, 0.5, and 0.8 to represent the small, moderate, and large effects were completely arbitrary.
So what does that mean? Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
So what does that mean for us then now? If those are completely arbitrary, so where do we go from there?
Well, if we take Kristen Sinani's advice, and she states that the type 1 error inflation is due to small sample sizes or inappropriately selected effect sizes for smallest worthwhile effects, perhaps one way to minimize the type 1 error rate in our studies is to simply increase our smallest worthwhile change. Now, how you do that probably stems another very long conversation, but that's one way. Another way is to have larger sample sizes, but I just don't know how we're going to get over that hurdle in our environment. Unless we all start working together across universities and pro teams, but that's not going to happen.
And so what you just said there, right, it kind of brings me to my next point. So within a department, right, there's sports science, there's sports psychology, there's nutrition, athletic training, and strength and conditioning. So where does one department end and like another begin? And how can we work together better for the common advancement of athletics?
That's probably the $1 million question there. And maybe that's where the high performance model comes in. And I've tried to look at this and tried to answer the question myself. There's a chance that a day will come when you don't need a sports scientist in an athletics department or within an athletics organization, a sports scientist who operates like I do. There's a chance that day might come if all of your strength coaches and all of your athletic trainers and your dietitians and everyone who's focused on the health, wellness, and performance of the athletes starts to operate like scientists. If that day comes, then truly the strength coach is the sports scientist. Truly the athletic trainer or physical therapist is the sports scientist. And so now what you have is a group of applied sports scientists who have interests and focuses within very specific domains. But the beautiful thing about it is that I don't think we're there yet. It's going to be quite a little while before we do get there. And at least the way that I've operated in my current job, and I freely roam across those different boundaries. And admittedly, there may be times where I might start to go too far over those boundaries. But my work is really about being the scientific cornerstone, being a person that everyone in those areas can count on, and they need more evidence at the table.
So you said you kind of freely roam, right? But that for you might be easy because you have a large background in strength and conditioning, right? And so how might someone with less of a background in another department kind of cross bridges and, speak the language of someone else in another department, if that makes sense?
Well, I guess the simple answer might be to become the most skilled scientist in the department. If you're the sports scientist and you make science your highest competence, then I think it becomes really easy to learn the research that has gone on in specific topics within a domain.
Okay.
And to be a good scientist, you really have to know, you have to develop skill in the steps of the scientific method, and that is to have a savvy ability to ask the right questions and identify problems that need solutions. And problems are a negative connotation, but just remember that 2 + 2 = 4.
Yeah.
So when I talk about problems, I mean, here's an opportunity for innovation, growth. That's the problem. The problem is let's create that application and embed it into our practice. So the next step, though, and that answers your question, is doing background research.
Okay.
So once you have identified a question or a problem that we want to develop an application, and do your background research. So if you know how to interpret scientific literature and text, then any topic is free game. It's public domain. There's no one that's stopping you from going and reading the published research about rehabilitation, nutrition, or performance psychology. There's no one stopping you from doing that. But if you go and read that information with focus, then you can kind of become what I like to call an instant expert on a topic. And there's an exercise that I teach people. It's called the instant expert exercise. It entails spending a finite number of hours. You choose, I'm going to spend 2 hours on this, I'm going to spend 4 hours on this, and I'm going to read first and foremost, the most up-to-date information I can find. And if there's not a lot of recent information on this topic, I'm going to just read as much as I can about this topic in this number of hours or days.
Okay.
And suddenly, you are completely up to speed on a very specific topic in an area.
Yeah. No, it's amazing to me the amount of people that don't do even the most minute amount of research in other departments, because working in a field like this, like we said earlier, right, there's a lot of crossover, and so to stay in a little silo it just hurts everyone. So it's wild to me that certain people don't reach out even a little bit just to understand each other and help make conversation easier.
Yeah, well, it becomes easier when we recognize that there are so many pieces to this puzzle, and they're all moving parts. They're all constant. They're all in constant dynamic motion, and the chemistry of sports performance and the way we manage teams and the way we serve athletes, it's so complex. We truly have to communicate more, and I might just say that communication is very, very important, but we can truly have success. We can have high performance without communication as long as there's a high degree of cooperation.
Yeah.
And cooperation is it's kind of like, let's all stay in our lanes. And as long as you stick within your very specific lane or your scope of responsibilities, cooperate with others and trust that they're going to do the same thing, then there doesn't necessarily have to be a lot of communication across those lanes. Kind of like maybe that's where this stay in your lane metaphor comes from. When you're driving in a car, you have multiple lanes. There's other people coming in the other lanes, and they're coming at you. And we're not really. There's a lot of that time is passive, and there's a lot of it. There's no communication that happens. We're cooperating.
Yeah. We're
cooperating with the system, and this model of cooperation that I'm describing is what I might call multidisciplinary practice.
Okay.
And it works, and it can. But the key to multidisciplinary practice is that it's it involves groups of people who are working towards a common problem or a common goal, but they work independently, and in a huge way they stay in their own lanes.
Yeah.
So that can work as long as you define that that's what you are.
Mm-hmm.
Let's cooperate, stay in our lanes, and let's do a really, really good job with our designated responsibilities. We can have high performance with that.
Mm.
So beyond multidisciplinary practice, there's interdisciplinarity.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of people just exchange those.
Mm-hmm.
But according to my research in the peer-reviewed literature, there's subtle difference. In interdisciplinary practice, people from different domains will become partners and interchangeable leaders
Mm-hmm.
who collaborate to resolve a problem.
Okay.
Or to develop a new application or an innovation. So I think that I think there could be greater fulfillment in a role or in a job when the environment is more interdisciplinary. Because I think what happens is your professionals start to transform into hybrids. Mm-hmm. They start to see some degree of cross-pollination mm-hmm. beyond their main domain expertise. And that, as you start to understand, you start to grow into those other areas, you start to learn their language more, and that really increases collaboration and innovative thought. Mm-hmm. But there might be one higher level.
Okay.
Than that, and whether it's real or not, I'm not sure. It could be a fantasy. It's what you refer to as transdisciplinary practice.
Okay.
And with transdisciplinarity, your domain-specific boundaries quickly fade, and the team members, the mm-hmm. group, the task force, they become very familiar and skilled with the foundational concepts and the technical skills mm-hmm. of each of the different disciplines that happen to be in the room.
Okay. Interesting.
And when these, and in this world, when you bring these people together and you step just beyond interdisciplinarity and you allow these people to truly face an issue without bias, then I think cross-pollination mm-hmm. occurs at a much higher level. Your hierarchies start to fade, and I think you collaborate in a way that allows a much deeper analysis to the point that suddenly completely new knowledge and theories and language will transcend from the disciplinary silos that everyone originally came from. Mm. And I think for me, taking steps to see if this world of transdisciplinarity mm-hmm. is this fantasy that I have. Mm-hmm. Is it truly possible for us all to dissolve our domain-specific boundaries and just operate as highly skilled professionals in a way that the systems and the structures and the rules we create and the language we form is unique to all of us, and all of us have an equal amount of knowledge? Mm. That would be really cool. Okay. Whether it's possible or not, I don't know.
Yeah. No, that's a very interesting idea. So with that, right, so obviously you work with multiple teams there as the director of sports science, and so football and basketball being among those teams, right? So how did these concepts kind of tie in with how you work with those teams and also juggle the smaller teams that you may work with?
First of all, I have a ton of autonomy in my role. Mm-hmm. My supervisor is amazing, mm-hmm. and I look up to her.
Okay. She's
a huge inspiration to me, and she trusts me. Obviously, football and men's basketball pay the bills mm-hmm. in larger programs, and it's clear to me that I have to put time and energy into those sports.
Yeah.
But I get a lot of freedom to choose how I'm going to focus my energy and what I'm going to develop.
Okay.
And that's really important, because if the volleyball coaching staff wants to bring us all together to form a truly collaborative sports performance team where everyone has a voice at the table and decisions are batted around until we come up with the best possible method. Mm-hmm. If I can't embrace that opportunity, then how can I truly grow greater collaboration in the athletics department?
Yeah.
So when that opportunity comes along and I invest in it, and commit to it, it provides, if successful, a proof of concept, so to speak, that can now grow and percolate into other sports and departments in the athletics organization. And so the way I operate in a lot of the things I'll pick and choose, in my mind, they have to have a greater benefit than how they might just help that team or that department, like the strength and conditioning department. I just have to see a greater benefit from it. How can this grow into other systems and processes? Because a college athletics department is full of so many different departments and subcultures. So if I have an opportunity to dive in to a concept with our football team, I really want that effort to somehow grow into all sports.
Okay.
And is it possible that the work I do with the volleyball team helps to give me new knowledge and new skills and a better way to do things that I can then bring over to another sport and potentially persuade my colleagues to start to operate in that fashion? Because now we've known it's had success there, maybe it could give us a small percentage of greater success here.
Okay.
So as I move around and do my rounds in the athletics department with strength and conditioning and nutrition and athletic training and all the different sports, I'm constantly seeking ways to help those methods grow into other departments and to ultimately help everyone reach a higher level of performance.
Okay, that's a really good answer right there. That's probably as good as it can get, right? I mean, there's no better way than, learning from each team that you work with and being able to apply it, right? Because now you're just getting better and you're magnifying everything that you touch. So that's fantastic. Okay. And kind of moving into this last question, right? So how can people follow you? How can people reach out to you and ask you questions?
First of all, I try to keep an open door policy, and I do my best to respond to people when they inquire. So everyone is free to look up my phone number on the University of Utah Athletics website.
Okay.
Give me a call, send me a text, introduce yourself, tell me who you are, and I'll do my best to get back to you. I'll be honest, I try to prioritize the immediate greatest needs at first, but I really make an effort to get back. And people can also email me. My email is ernest.rimer@icloud.com. And while I'm not very active on Twitter and even less active on Instagram, I don't know if it'll really benefit you to follow me because most of the stuff I put on there is of humorous value and not much conceptual or sports science related value. But if you'd like to check me out and have a laugh, usually about coffee or family affairs, then you could check that out.
Fair enough. Awesome. Well, this has been fantastic. Ernie, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. I know the listeners are going to get a lot out of it, and I look forward to connecting with you again in the future.
Thank you. And once again, I really appreciate the opportunity. I'm humbled by it. Thank you for inviting me to be a guest. I hope that you enjoyed this time, and I just want to thank all of you.
Thanks again for listening, and a big thanks to sports scientist Ernie Rimer for helping break down the barriers of what we think sports science is and what we think sports scientists are like. A lot of people think sports scientists are people that have little to no personal skills, but as you can see, that perception is false. I would encourage you to dig into sports science a little bit more so you can help enrich your department. And if you enjoyed the podcast, please like, comment, share, and give it a 5-star rating. Thanks again for joining us, and until next week, this is the Gamut of Performance Podcast.